This is the Helpful Lockpicker here, and welcome back to my Lockpicking Homeschool series. The video I have for you today is going over the 4 pen states you can find your pin and tumbler locks in when dealing with standard pens. The first state is when the lock is at rest. This is the normal position that you can find the lock in before any picking takes place. In this state, the driver pins are sitting into the keyway and they are blocking the plug rotation. The second state is a set pin. A set pin takes place when you've successfully pushed the key pin and lifted the driver pin above shear and it is no longer blocking plug rotation. The third state is an overset pin. This happens when you have set the key pin too high and now it is in between the plug and the Bible and is obstructing plug rotation. And the fourth state is an underset pin. This is where the driver pin is still blocking plug rotation and it has not been set high enough. There is a fifth state that we will get into later, but briefly, it is when you set the pin and it causes a false set where the plug rotates like it's going to open, but it is still obstructed. We will get into the fifth state more when we get into security pins. What I'd like to do now is go over each state individually, and I have this cutaway lock with a Schlage keyway, and we'll get a closer look at each state, and then I want to briefly go over how bitting can affect the pen states when picking. Now before we get started, I'd like to go over how the bitting of a key can affect the picking. Right now the lock is at its resting state, and when I insert the proper key, it will lift all the driver pins up and out of the way, and then the plug will turn freely. Now, as a more exaggerated example, I'm going to show you this key, but both of these keys have some good bitting, which is the cut on the keys, which is some good ups and downs. On this key, you can see that this is a really deep cut in one. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you need to remember that the length of the key pin plus the length of the cut on the key all equal the same height. So pin 1 is going to use a really long key pin, where pin 2 is going to use a short one. In order to set pin 2, it's going to be very hard to not touch pin 1, and if you do touch pin 1, you might lift it too high and overset it quite easily. So what I like to do is go down in an angle if the keyway will allow it and try to get around those key pins easily. When you have a really long key pin in the front, it can make really a difficult time for setting the key pins in the back. One workaround you can do, if the keyway will allow it, is to use a deeper hook. And with a deeper hook, you can really reach right around and set these pins without oversetting them. Good variations in the bitting can make a lock a lot harder to open and make it more prone to oversetting. So I just rekeyed this lock to a new key. It's a 71541. This lock has some good bitting on it. I just want to give you an alternate view. So right now I have the plug here with all the key pins in it. The 7 cut's a very long key pin. As you can tell, the driver pin is just sticking out because the key pin terminates pretty close to the shear line. Not quite there, but pretty close. Key pin 1 is so short that the driver pin is fully recessed all the way down. And this is what this lock looks like in its resting state. But as you could imagine, trying to set pin 2 could be quite difficult without touching pin 1. And I'm going to get you another view in just a second. Alright, so I just took the driver pins out, and I just want to show you what picking this lock with a standard hook looks like on a lock with some decently challenging bitting. So, when I start off with pin 1, I can lift that easily, but once I get to pin 2, it's quite hard to lift it without interfacing with pin 1. You can see I'm starting to overlift 1 a little bit. And 3, 4, and then 5 in the back's quite hard to lift up without oversetting stuff. You can see I'm oversetting pins 1, 3, and 4. So a couple ways to overcome this is, if the keyway will allow it, try to go in more at an angle. And then also you can use a deeper hook. I never advise you go just straight horizontally, and going at an angle helps a lot, and then using a deeper hook helps as well if the keyway will allow it. On this lock, the keyway is pretty difficult to get through the middle here, so you don't really have too much option trying to get in at a big angle through the center. So I'm going to see if I can demonstrate with my deeper hook how we can get these pins lifted without oversetting them. So we got pin 1, that's okay. Now pin 2 is tricky because it's a short key pin behind a really long key pin. So right there, we're able to lift up 2, but we are touching 1, but we didn't overset it. Now going to 3, we're able to set that, which is a little bit easier because that's a longer key pin. Pin 4, we are touching pin 1 right now, but we are able to get 4 up. And then pin 5 is quite difficult because it is such a short key pin in the very back of the lock. Let's see if we can get that. Alright, there's pin 5. So if I can try to go at an angle and lift my pick up at an angle, I can get 5 set without touching the other pins. But in order to do that, I used my deeper hook, and I didn't go in just like this. I had to go in slightly at an angle to be able to give me that extra room. But let's get this lock up in the vise and see if we can see this in action. Alright, we got the lock up in the vise right now, and you can tell that it's in its resting state. All the driver pins are recessed, and they are securing the lock. We just repinned this lock to a 5-pin lock, so we do not have a driver pin in 6. And when we insert the key, it lifts all the driver pins up to shear, and it turns the plug freely. Now we're going to try to pick this lock open and go through the 4-pin states together. So we have a resting state, a set state, an overset state, and an underset state. I'm going to insert my tension wrench and we will see what we can find. I'm going to search for a binder pin. I'm going to start off with 1 here, and 1 does feel like it's binding, and you hear that shear line click there. Now we're going to move on to pin 2. It's pin 1 feels set. Once you get it to the set state, the key pin starts to feel kind of floppy, like there's nothing pushing down on it anymore because it's set and that spring pressure is not on it. Now we're going to go to 2, which feels binding, has a lot of resistance, but it's a really high set pin because it's so short, it's hard to get to. Now pin 2 is set. I'm going to go to the middle of the lock here, 3. It feels springy, it's not binding at all. 4, springy as well. So now we have to get to 5. If we remember, 5 is a really short key pin behind all these long key pins, so it's hard to set it without oversetting the other one. So let's just go see if we can get it. And incidentally, as I set pin 5, I don't know if you noticed, I was oversetting 4 and 3 with the shaft of my pick, and it actually lifted them up to shear line as I was setting 5, and we got an open. So that was actually kind of an interesting open. But let's see if we can get some other examples of different pin states in a moment. Alright, we got a little lucky on the last open, because as we were trying to set that short key pin in 5, the shaft of the pick lifted 3 and 4 up, and we were able to clear the shear line. I'm going to try using my deeper hook and see if we can single pin pick this, and then we'll go over some more of the pin states as they come up. So I'm going to start off with pen 1, which was the binder last time. Good click. Pen 2. Good click. 3 feels loose. 4 feels loose. Now 5 is the tricky one because it is such a short key pen. 5. I'm touching 3 and 4 as I'm doing this. Okay, 5 set. Now, pen 3, binding, got a good click. And then if you look at it, we have pens 1, 2, 3, and 5 in their set state. So far our binding order has been 1, 2, and 5, and then 3. Let's see if we can get pen 4 now. And we're open. So now all the pens are at their set state and they're able to be opened. Now let's try to take a closer look at some of the other pen states in just a moment. Now I'd like to go over oversetting pens and some tips to prevent them. But first off, let me show you what an overset pen looks like, and I'm going to overset the pen in chamber 1 right now. As you can tell, pen 1 has been overset. The key pen's partially in the Bible and in the plug, and is going to prevent the plug from rotating if all the other pins were set. One thing I have always found is skillful tensioning is more important than skillful picking. This lock has all standard pens. That means I can go a little bit heavier on the tension. When I go, say, about a moderate tension, when I set pen 1, you can really hear a good shear line click, and it's very difficult to overset it. Now pin 1 is set. When I reset the lock and I do a light tension, I can easily overset it like I just did here. Now when I am doing moderate tension, it makes it very hard to overset a pen, and it is a good technique to use. Another thing you can do is just try to go easy on your pens. Do not force a pen that doesn't want to move. And you should always be taking notes on the pens that you're setting as you go along and try to figure out the binding order. When you're dealing with locks with difficult bitting, and just in general, I always like to pick at an angle if I can in the lock and not just go in horizontally, because when you go in horizontally, you might be trying to hit the pen in the back and you may hit the other pens with the shaft of the pick. We may have got lucky on one of our openings when I was trying to set pen 5 that the shaft of the pick lifted 3 and 4 perfectly to the shear line. However, this does not always work in your favor and it can lead to overset pens. Another thing you can always try to do is if you're having trouble picking a lock, say front to back, you can try back to front. Some locks pick a lot easier depending on if you start from the back to the front or the front to the back. Just keep that as a tool in your arsenal. Also, don't be afraid to use a deeper hook if the lock allows. Now I'd like to briefly go over underset pens. I'm going to set pen 1 and then we will try to underset pen 2. So an underset pen is a driver pen that is resting in the plug, but it has not yet cleared the shear line and it is blocking pen rotation. So when I go to pen 2, you can see that its resting state is all the way down here because it's such a short key pen. But when I go to lift it and say I stop here, the driver pin has been lifted up partially, but it is not clearing the shear line, and that will not allow the lock to open. When I compare pin 1 to 2, 1 is in the set state, so the key pin feels pretty floppy and not under spring pressure. Pin 3 and 4 and 5 just feel springy, they're not ready to set yet. But pin 2 still feels like it's binding, so what I need to do is just continue lifting it, got that good shear line click, and now pins 1 and 2 feel loose, like they have been set. Now I'm going to go back to pin 5 because we know the binding order. We're going to try to set pin 5, and we just got lucky again. The shaft of my pick lifted up 3 and 4 as I was lifting up pin 5, and we got the lock open. As a quick recap, what we went over today is the 4 pin states that you can find a pin and tumbler lock in when learning to pick a lock with standard pins, and how bitting can affect the picking. The first state is at rest. That is the state the lock is in prior to picking. You can see all the driver pins are sitting down in the plug and keeping the plug from rotating. The second state is the set state. That is when you have successfully set a driver pin and it has cleared the shear line. Often in locks with standard pins, when you set the pin above the shear line, you can hear an audible click, and the key pin will start to feel kind of floppy, like nothing is pushing down on it anymore, and it is just the weight of gravity holding it up. The third state is the overset state. This is when you have lifted the key pin too high, and it is now blocking the plug rotation because the key pin is in between the plug and the Bible. We went over a few techniques to help prevent oversetting pins. One is using a moderate amount of tension on locks with standard pins can make it a lot easier to not overset a pin. Lighter tension increases the chances of oversetting. Also, when you are picking your lock, you want to try to go in at an angle. You do not want to go straight in horizontally, because that will help you hit the pins individually. Also, you can try using a deeper hook if needed, but you always need to pay attention to what the keyway will allow you to get in, because not all locks have open keyways. You always want to try to take mental notes of the binding order and what's going on. If you're having trouble picking the lock from front to back, you can always try it from back to front. A lot of locks pick a lot easier in one direction, either front to back or back to front. Also, never try to force a pin. If it doesn't feel like it's moving, do not force it. The fourth state is the underset state. This is when you have lifted a driver pin, but it has not fully cleared the shear line yet, and it is still blocking plug rotation. As a reminder, I always find skillful tensioning to be more important than skillful picking, and it plays a big part in opening locks successfully. As always, remember, practice, practice, practice. That is what will make you get better, and this isn't something that you can just learn quickly if you do not keep practicing. This is a diminishing skill, and you need to keep current with it to keep your skill level up. If you guys have any suggestions or questions on the video content that you saw today, please leave them in the comments below. If you like this video and you would like to see more like it, please subscribe. As always, thank you so much for checking out this video, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.